The message came through while I was replacing brake pads in my garage. You're not man enough for me anymore, Daniel. I need someone who can keep up. My hands stopped moving. Grease under my nails, wrench still gripping the caliper, and those words glowing on my phone screen like they'd been waiting years to finally say it out loud. 38 years old, married for 9, and my wife just told me I wasn't enough through a text message. Not a conversation. Not even a phone call. A text. While I was fixing her car. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Daniel Carter, and I've never been the loudest guy in any room. I work as a senior mechanic at a custom auto shop in Phoenix, Arizona. I build engines from scratch, restore classics, and solve problems most people don't even know exist under their hoods. It's honest work. Work that leaves your hands rough and your back sore, but when you turn that key and hear something purr that was dead yesterday, there's a satisfaction that doesn't need explaining. My wife, Jessica, used to say she loved that about me. The quiet competence. The way I could fix anything without making a production out of it. That was 7 years ago, back when her words still matched her eyes. We met at a car show. She was there with friends, laughing near a vintage Mustang I'd spent 2 years rebuilding for a client. She asked questions that showed genuine interest, not the polite kind people fake at parties. We talked about compression ratios and fuel injection like normal people discuss weather. 3 months later, she moved into my place. 2 years after that, we got married in her parents' backyard with string lights and a playlist she spent weeks perfecting. It felt simple and real, the kind of foundation you could build a whole life on. I thought we had. The text sat there while I wiped my hands on a shop rag. I read it 3 times, each pass making the words heavier. Not man enough. The phrase had teeth. It wasn't just rejection. It was diagnosis. A verdict delivered without trial. I looked around my garage at the tools organized by size, the project car in the corner waiting for new headers, the life I'd built with precision and care. Everything in its place except apparently me. I didn't text back right away. Men who work with engines learn patience. You don't force a bolt that's fighting you. You let it breathe, apply heat, come back with the right angle. So I set the phone down, finished the brake job, and let my mind work the problem the way it works a stuck timing belt. Methodical. Thorough. Without emotion clouding the diagnosis. That night, Jessica came home late. Again. She'd been doing that for months, always with explanations that sounded reasonable until you lined them up and noticed the gaps. Dinner with coworkers. Yoga class running over. Traffic that only seemed to exist on her route. She walked past me in the kitchen without eye contact, heading straight for the shower. I heard the water run for 20 minutes, the kind of long wash that feels less like cleaning and more like shedding something. When she emerged, hair wrapped in a towel, I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea. The kind of scene that used to mean connection. She hesitated in the doorway, reading the room like someone who'd just walked into an ambush. I slid 1 mug toward the empty chair. She sat, but her body language said she'd rather be anywhere else. I kept my voice level, the same tone I use when explaining engine problems to customers who don't want bad news but need to hear it anyway. I got your message today. She blinked. For a second, confusion crossed her face like she'd sent so many messages she couldn't track which one landed where. Then recognition settled in, followed immediately by defense. Her shoulders went back. Oh. That. I was frustrated. You know how I get. I let the silence stretch. Frustration doesn't text. Decisions do. She looked at her mug like it might offer her an exit. I wasn't trying to hurt you. The words came out practiced, like she'd rehearsed them in the car. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands folded. That specific phrase. Not man enough. Where did that come from? Her eyes flicked to the window, the ceiling, anywhere but my face. It's just something people say. I shook my head slowly. No. It's something someone says when they're comparing. When there's a measuring stick involved. Her jaw tightened. You're reading too much into it. Maybe. Or maybe I'm reading it exactly right. The conversation died there. She took her tea upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen until the house went quiet, then opened my laptop and did what any man does when his gut starts screaming. I looked for patterns. Her phone bills showed texts to a number I didn't recognize, hundreds of them, clustered around times she claimed to be in meetings or at the gym. Her credit card statements had charges at restaurants we'd never been to together, always for two, always during lunch hours when she said she was eating at her desk. I cross-referenced her social media check-ins with her explanations. She'd posted a sunset photo from a hiking trail last month, tagged with solo time and self-care. But her location history, the one we shared for emergencies, showed she'd been at a different trailhead entirely. Not the popular one with families and tourists. The secluded one where people go when they don't want to be seen. I took screenshots of everything. Not because I wanted to use them. Because ignoring evidence doesn't make it disappear. It just makes you the fool who chose blindness. The next morning, I woke up to find her side of the bed untouched. I walked downstairs and saw her asleep on the couch, fully dressed, phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. I didn't wake her. I made coffee, fed our dog Max, and left for work an hour early. The shop was empty when I arrived. I liked it that way. Just me and the smell of oil and metal and possibility. I pulled out my project car, a '72 Chevelle I'd been building for myself, and lost myself in the work. Hands busy, mind quiet. That's where men like me find clarity. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Jessica. We need to talk. I stared at the message, then set the phone face down on my toolbox. She'd spent months avoiding real conversation, and now that I'd stopped chasing answers, suddenly there was urgency. Classic move. I didn't respond. I went back to adjusting the carburetor, feeling the fuel mixture find its balance. There's honesty in mechanical systems. They don't lie about what they need or pretend to be something they're not. You either tune them right or they quit. Simple. Lunchtime came. I usually ate at my desk, but today I drove to a diner across town. Quiet booth in the back, good coffee, and a waitress named Maria who'd been working there since before I was born. She didn't ask questions, just refilled my cup and let me think. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Jessica's recent posts. All of them glowing. Inspirational quotes about growth and change. Photos filtered to perfection. Captions about finding yourself and embracing new chapters. The comment sections filled with hearts and encouragement from people who had no idea what story they were applauding. But I noticed something. In the background of a photo from 2 weeks ago, a coffee shop she claimed to have visited alone, there was a reflection in the window. Just a sliver of someone sitting across from her. Male frame. Broad shoulders. The angle was wrong for it to be accidental. She'd cropped him out of the shot but left his ghost in the glass. I zoomed in. His watch was visible. Expensive. The kind you wear when you want people to know you've arrived somewhere worth noticing. I saved the image and added it to my growing file. That evening, I came home to an ambush. Jessica was waiting in the living room with her sister, Monica, who gave me a look that could strip paint. Daniel, we need to have an honest conversation. Monica started before I'd even set my keys down. Jessica's been unhappy for a long time, and you've been too focused on your cars to notice. I looked at Jessica, who suddenly found the coffee table fascinating. This felt rehearsed. Coordinated. An intervention for a problem I was only just being told existed. I sat down across from them, calm as a Sunday morning. Okay. Let's have that honest conversation. What specifically have I done that's made you unhappy? Jessica opened her mouth, closed it, then looked at her sister like she was waiting for the script. Monica jumped in. You're emotionally unavailable. You don't communicate. You're always in that garage. I nodded slowly, taking it in. So working to pay our bills and maintain our home makes me unavailable. Monica's expression hardened. It's not about the work. It's about priorities. I leaned back, hands resting on my knees. Last month, I asked Jessica 3 times to go hiking with me. She said she was too busy. 2 months ago, I planned a weekend trip to Sedona for our anniversary. She canceled because a work project came up. 3 months ago, I suggested we start cooking dinner together like we used to. She said she'd rather order in because she was exhausted. I looked directly at Jessica. So when exactly did my priorities become the problem? The room went silent. Monica's certainty cracked at the edges. Jessica's face flushed. Those were different. How? I kept my voice even, not attacking, just asking. Because from where I'm sitting, I've been trying to connect, and you've been the one who's unavailable. Monica stood up, clearly ready to leave now that the narrative wasn't cooperating. This isn't productive. She looked at Jessica. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Call me later. And then she was gone, leaving us alone in the wreckage of her failed rescue mission. Jessica sat there, arms crossed, walls up. You're twisting things. I shook my head. I'm just repeating what happened. If the facts feel twisted, maybe that's because they don't line up with the story you've been telling yourself. She stood abruptly. I can't do this right now. And she walked out. Not upstairs. Out. Car keys in hand, purse over her shoulder, gone. I watched through the window as she backed out of the driveway too fast, tires chirping against the pavement. Max whined at my feet, sensing the tension. I scratched behind his ears and spoke to the empty room. It's all right, buddy. We're gonna be fine. The house felt different after she left. Not empty. Honest. I walked through each room, seeing it clearly for the first time in months. The pile of her unopened mail on the counter. The laundry she'd started but never finished. The half-empty wine glasses on the nightstand that I'd been cleaning up without comment. Evidence of someone who'd already left but hadn't bothered to pack. I gathered it all up. Not in anger. In acknowledgement. If she was gone, she was gone. Leaving the debris didn't change that. It just made the truth harder to see. I spent the next hour doing what I should have done weeks ago. I checked our joint bank account. 3 large withdrawals over the past 2 months, each one labeled miscellaneous. I opened her credit card statement that had been sitting sealed in the mail pile. Charges at hotels. Not in Phoenix. In Scottsdale. The nice part. The part where people go when they're trying to impress someone. Dinner reservations at places that require reservations. Spa treatments. A jewelry purchase from a boutique that specialized in men's accessories. I photographed every page. Then I did something I wasn't proud of but couldn't avoid. I opened her laptop. She'd left it on the kitchen counter, password saved into her email. I'm not a snoop by nature. But when someone tells you you're not enough and then disappears without explanation, you stop worrying about privacy and start worrying about truth. Her inbox was a roadmap. Emails from someone named Trevor. Hundreds of them. Starting casual 8 months ago, turning familiar by month 6, and by last month, they'd crossed every line that mattered. The messages weren't just flirty. They were future planning. Talk of trips they'd take once things were settled. Mentions of her finally being free. References to me as the obstacle. The weight holding her back. In one email, he'd written, "You deserve someone who sees your potential, not someone who's content staying small." She'd replied, "I know. I'm working on it." I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Not crying. Not raging. Just absorbing the full shape of the betrayal. It wasn't impulsive. It was architected. Jessica didn't come home that night. Or the next. On the 3rd day, I got a text. Staying with Monica for a while. Need space to think. I replied with one sentence. Take all the time you need. I wasn't being generous. I was being strategic. While she was thinking, I was acting. I called a lawyer, a guy named Richard Moss who'd handled a friend's divorce 2 years prior. We met in his office downtown, a place that smelled like leather and old books. I laid out everything. The text. The emails. The charges. The photos with ghosted reflections. He listened without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. You've been thorough. That helps. Arizona is a no-fault state, but evidence of infidelity can impact asset division and spousal support claims. Do you own your home jointly? I shook my head. I bought it 3 years before we got married. Title's in my name. He nodded. Good. What about vehicles? Both registered to me. I'm a mechanic. I handle all that. Retirement accounts. Separate. We kept our finances mostly independent. She has her own career, her own accounts. Richard smiled, the kind of smile lawyers give when they realize the case just got easier. You've set yourself up well. Whether you knew it or not. He walked me through the process. Filing timelines. Disclosure requirements. What to expect from her legal response once she got served. He also gave me advice that stuck. Don't let emotion dictate your moves. Stay calm. Document everything. And whatever you do, don't leave the house. It's yours. Make her leave if she wants out. I shook his hand and left feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Not over her. Over my own situation. I spent that afternoon changing all my passwords. Bank accounts. Email. Streaming services. Everything we'd shared access to became mine alone. I wasn't being petty. I was drawing boundaries that should have existed all along. I also called our cell phone provider and split the plan. She'd get her own bill now, her own responsibility. Then I went through our bedroom and removed anything of mine that held sentimental value. Photos from before her. Gifts from my family. My grandfather's watch. I put it all in a lockbox in my garage. If she wanted to burn bridges, she wouldn't burn my history with them. When Jessica finally came home 5 days later, she walked into a house that had shifted. Not dramatically. Subtly. Like a frequency change you feel more than hear. She noticed the password changes immediately. Why can't I get into the Netflix account? I looked up from the engine manual I was reading. Because it's my account. She blinked. We shared that. We did. Past tense. Her face cycled through confusion, offense, and then something close to fear. You're being ridiculous. Maybe. Or maybe I'm being clear. She tried a different angle, softening her voice. Daniel, I know things have been rough. But we can work through this. I set the manual down and gave her my full attention. Work through what, exactly? She hesitated. Us. Our problems. I nodded slowly. Okay. Let's start with the basics. Who's Trevor? The color drained from her face. How do you know that name? Your emails. You left your laptop open. I read enough to understand what's been happening. She stepped back like I'd physically pushed her. That's a violation of privacy. I stood up, still calm, still measured. You're right. It is. Just like sleeping with another man is a violation of marriage. We can compare violations if you want, but I don't think you'll win that contest. She grabbed for anger because it was easier than shame. I haven't slept with anyone. The emails say otherwise. They're just words. Words planning a future that doesn't include me. Words calling me an obstacle. Words saying you're working on getting free. She had no response to that. The truth has a way of cornering people. I walked past her toward the kitchen. I've filed for divorce. The papers will be served to you within the week. You can stay here tonight if you need to pack your things, but after that, you'll need to find somewhere else. This is my house. She followed me, voice rising. You can't just kick me out. Actually, I can. The house is mine. Bought and paid for before you. Check the deed if you don't believe me. She stared at me like I'd become someone she didn't recognize. Maybe I had. Or maybe she was finally seeing who I'd always been. Someone who doesn't tolerate disrespect disguised as love. That night, she packed. Not everything. Just enough to make it clear she wasn't coming back. I didn't help. I didn't hinder. I sat on the porch with Max and listened to drawers opening and closing, hangers scraping across rods, the sounds of someone erasing themselves from a life they'd already abandoned emotionally. When she finally emerged, suitcase in hand, she stopped at the door. You're really doing this? I met her eyes. No. You did this. I'm just handling the paperwork. She left without another word. The door clicked shut, and the house exhaled. The next few weeks were a study in persistence. Jessica hired a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen who had a reputation for being aggressive. The first letter I received from her office was a masterpiece of accusation. I was controlling. Financially manipulative. Emotionally abusive. They were seeking spousal support, half the value of the house, and compensation for emotional distress. Richard read it over the phone to me, his tone almost amused. This is posturing. They're hoping you'll panic and settle. I didn't panic. I sent Richard everything. Every email. Every receipt. Every screenshot. The timeline I'd built showing her deception. The proof that the house was mine. The evidence of her own financial independence. 2 weeks later, Patricia's tone changed. A new letter arrived, much shorter, much quieter. They were willing to forego the house claim. They'd accept a minimal settlement. They wanted this resolved quickly and quietly. Richard called it what it was. Retreat. They saw what we have, and they know they can't win. Do you want to settle? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to drag this out, make her face every lie in open court. But another part, the part that just wanted to move forward, said let it go. Not for her. For me. I told Richard to accept the offer with one condition. She signs a non-disparagement clause. Whatever story she tells, it can't include lies about me. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in October. I sat in the courtroom wearing the same jacket I'd worn to our wedding. Not to be sentimental. Because it still fit and I wasn't buying new clothes for this. Jessica sat on the opposite side with Patricia, refusing to look at me. The judge reviewed the settlement, asked the required questions, signed the order, and just like that, 9 years dissolved into a legal document. I walked out into the Phoenix sun feeling lighter. Not happy. Not sad. Just lighter. Like I'd been carrying a toolbox full of broken things and finally set it down. I went back to work and threw myself into the Chevelle. It had been sitting half-finished for too long. I ordered the parts one needed, cleared my schedule of everything non-essential, and spent every evening in the garage bringing it back to life. New exhaust. Fresh paint. Custom interior. It became more than a project. It became proof that broken things can be made whole again if you're patient and persistent. 3 months after the divorce, I fired it up for the first time. The engine roared clean and strong, every cylinder firing in perfect sequence. I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, and felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Pride. Around that same time, I started noticing someone at the gym. I joined a few months back, part of my rebuilding phase. Her name was Sophie. Tall, athletic build, dark hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail. She worked as a physical therapist and had the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're capable of. We'd exchanged polite nods for weeks before she finally spoke to me one morning. You're the guy with the Chevelle, right? I saw you pulling yesterday. That thing sounds incredible. We started talking cars. Turns out her dad had been a gearhead, and she'd grown up helping him restore a '67 Camaro. She knew her way around an engine bay, could talk compression and timing without needing a translation. It was easy. No games. No performance. Just two people who spoke the same language. We started having coffee after workouts. Then lunch. Then she asked if I'd help her track down a weird noise in her Jeep. I spent a Saturday afternoon in her driveway diagnosing a loose heat shield. She paid me in homemade tacos and beer. It felt normal. Comfortable. Like friendship without the weight of expectation. I didn't tell her about Jessica right away. It wasn't avoidance. It just didn't seem relevant. But one evening, sitting on her back patio after fixing her Jeep's air conditioning, she asked the question I knew was coming. So why's a guy like you single? I took a long drink of my beer and decided honesty was easier than deflection. Divorced. Finalized about 4 months ago. She nodded, not probing, just acknowledging. That's rough. It was. But it was also necessary. She didn't ask for details. Didn't offer platitudes. Just said, well, her loss, and changed the subject to a car show coming up next month. That's when I knew Sophie was different. She wasn't trying to fix me or fill a gap. She was just present. We kept hanging out. Car shows. Weekend drives through the desert. A hiking trip where we both agreed the view was worth the brutal incline. It was effortless in a way my marriage never had been. No scorekeeping. No hidden agendas. Just two people enjoying each other's company without needing it to be more than what it was. And somewhere in that ease, I started feeling like myself again. Not the man Jessica said wasn't enough. Just Daniel. The guy who builds engines and fixes things and shows up when he says he will. About 6 months post-divorce, Sophie and I were grabbing lunch at a taco spot downtown when I saw her. Jessica. She was with someone. Not Trevor. Someone new. Younger. Flashier. The kind of guy who wears designer sunglasses indoors. They were laughing, his hand on her lower back, her leaning into him like they were the only two people in the world. I felt Sophie notice my attention shift. You okay? I nodded. Yeah. Just someone I used to know. Sophie followed my gaze, clocked the situation immediately, and without missing a beat, reached across the table and took my hand. Then let's make sure she knows you've upgraded. I smiled. Not at Jessica. At Sophie's audacity. We finished our lunch, paid, and walked out past their table. Jessica saw me. Her laughter cut off mid-sound. Her eyes went from me to Sophie, taking in the easy connection, the relaxed body language, the fact that I looked genuinely happy. I didn't stop. Didn't gloat. Just gave a polite nod and kept walking. But I felt her stare burning into my back. Sophie squeezed my hand. That the ex yep. She glanced back over her shoulder. Yeah. You definitely won that divorce. I laughed, and it felt good. Not because I'd won anything. Because I'd chosen better the second time around. The encounter at the taco place lingered longer than I expected. Not because seeing Jessica rattled me, but because of what happened after. Sophie and I were driving back to the shop when my phone started lighting up. Text after text. All from Jessica. Each one progressively more unhinged. Who is she? How long have you been seeing her? You moved on fast. I guess I was right about what kind of man you are. I showed Sophie the screen at a red light. She read them, eyebrows climbing with each message, then looked at me with something between amusement and disbelief. Is she serious right now? I set the phone in the cup holder. Apparently. Sophie shook her head. The audacity is genuinely impressive. She cheats, divorces you, and then gets mad that you're not sitting at home crying about it. I had to laugh because she was absolutely right. I didn't respond to any of Jessica's messages. Not that day. Not that week. Silence is a language people who need attention can't translate. But the messages kept coming. First angry, then confused, then weirdly sentimental. Do you remember our first trip to Sedona? I miss when things were good between us. Maybe we gave up too soon. Each one felt like someone rewriting history in real time, trying to sand down the sharp edges of her own choices. I screenshotted every single one and sent them to Richard. He replied within an hour. Document everything. This could be relevant if she tries to modify the settlement. Don't engage. Let her spiral alone. Sophie and I kept spending time together, and it evolved naturally into something more intentional. We weren't rushing into labels or making grand declarations. We were just choosing each other, day after day, in small deliberate ways. She'd bring coffee to the shop when she finished her morning clients. I'd pick her up after late appointments and we'd grab dinner somewhere low-key. We talked about real things. Her frustration with insurance companies denying necessary treatments for her patients. My plans to expand the shop and bring on another mechanic. The hiking trip we wanted to take to Havasupai Falls. It was easy in the way relationships should be but rarely are. No drama. No second-guessing. Just two people building something honest. About a month after the taco place incident, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Daniel. It's Monica. Jessica's sister. The last person I expected or wanted to hear from. I kept my voice neutral. What can I do for you, Monica? There was a pause, the kind that carries weight. I owe you an apology. That made me sit up straighter in my office chair. I was at the house that night to ambush you because Jessica told me you were being controlling and distant. But I've been watching what's happened since, and I don't think she told me the truth. I waited, letting her continue. She's been posting constantly about healing and growth, but her actions don't match her words. And when I asked her directly about what happened, her story kept changing. I think she cheated on you, Daniel. And I think I helped her make you feel like the villain. I respected Monica for that call more than she probably realized. It takes courage to admit you were wrong, especially when it means accepting that someone you love hurt someone else. I appreciate you telling me that. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. For what it's worth, you deserved better. I know. And I found it. The conversation ended there, no need to drag it out. But it confirmed something I'd suspected. Jessica's narrative was collapsing under the weight of its own inconsistencies. When you build a story on lies, eventually the foundation cracks. Sophie met my family for the first time over a barbecue at my mom's place. My mother, Susan, is the kind of woman who can read a room in 3 seconds and knows exactly where everyone stands. She pulled me aside while Sophie was helping my dad with the grill. She's good for you. I can see it. You look like yourself again. I kissed her cheek. Thanks, Ma. She patted my arm. That other one. Jessica. She always seemed like she was performing. Like she was trying to convince everyone, including herself, that she was happy. Sophie just as happy. And that makes you happy. It wasn't complicated wisdom. It was the simple truth that mothers see before anyone else does. Later that evening, Sophie and I were sitting on my mom's back porch, the Arizona sunset turning everything orange and gold. She looked over at me, something thoughtful in her expression. Can I ask you something? Always. Did you ever see it coming? The divorce, I mean. I considered the question honestly. Parts of it, yeah. The distance. The excuses. But I didn't want to see the whole picture. I think I knew something was wrong, but I convinced myself it was fixable if I just worked harder at it. She nodded. That's the trap, isn't it? Thinking love is about effort instead of alignment. You can't effort your way into being chosen. That hit me square in the chest because it was exactly right. I'd spent the last 2 years of my marriage trying to be enough, not realizing that Jessica had already decided I wasn't. Not because of anything I lacked, but because she wanted permission to chase something that felt shinier. Sophie reached over and took my hand. I'm not her, Daniel. I'm not going to make you guess where you stand or punish you for being exactly who you are. I choose you on purpose. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And that's worth more than whatever fantasy she was chasing. I pulled her closer, and we sat there in the fading light, two people who'd both learned the hard way that honesty beats performance every single time. Work picked up in a significant way. Word had spread about the Chevelle, and suddenly I was getting calls from people wanting custom builds and restorations. High-end projects with real budgets. I hired an apprentice, a kid named Jason who reminded me of myself at 20. Hungry to learn, respectful of the craft, willing to put in the hours. The shop went from a steady income to something genuinely profitable. I wasn't getting rich, but I was building something sustainable. Something I could be proud of. Sophie joked that I'd gone from sad divorced guy to Phoenix's most eligible mechanic in 6 months. I told her the only eligibility that mattered was hers. One Saturday, Sophie and I took the Chevelle out for a long drive through the desert. Top down, music low, the kind of afternoon that feels infinite. We stopped at a roadside diner in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place with vinyl booths and waitresses who call everyone honey. We were halfway through burgers when my phone buzzed. A message from Trevor. Yes, that Trevor. I need to talk to you about Jessica. It's important. I showed Sophie the screen. She read it and snorted. Oh, this should be good. I typed back. You've got 5 minutes. Make it count. His response came fast. She's been telling people you abused her. That you manipulated her and isolated her from friends. I'm hearing it from multiple people, and I wanted you to know. I stared at the message, feeling the familiar rise of anger, then forced it back down. Deep breath. Clear head. I replied. That's defamation. I have documentation proving otherwise, including the emails where she admitted to the affair. If she continues spreading those lies, I'll pursue legal action. Feel free to share that with her. Trevor's response was almost immediate. I'm not with her anymore, man. I just thought you should know what she's saying. I believe you. She did the same thing to me. Blamed me for everything when it fell apart. Sophie watched my face as I processed this. He dumped her. Apparently. And now she's trying to rewrite history so she's the victim instead of the cheater. Sophie leaned back, arms crossed. So what are you going to do? I set the phone down and picked up my burger. I'm going to finish lunch. Then I'm going to send Richard a heads up. And then I'm going to let her keep digging her own hole. People who lie eventually contradict themselves. She'll do the work for me. Sophie grinned. That's cold. I call it efficient. True to my word, I sent Richard everything. Trevor's message. The claims Jessica was allegedly making. Richard responded within hours. This is harassment and defamation. I'll draft a cease and desist. If she continues, we can pursue damages. Do you want to move forward with that? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to make her face consequences for trying to destroy my reputation. But another part of me just wanted to be done. To let her fade into irrelevance while I kept building my life. I told Richard to send the cease and desist but hold off on further action unless she escalated. Sometimes the threat is enough. Sometimes people need to know there's a line they can't cross without real consequences. The cease and desist worked. The messages stopped. The accusations dried up. Whether Jessica got scared or simply ran out of energy, I didn't know and didn't care. The silence was a gift. I stopped checking her social media. Stopped wondering what narrative she was spinning. She became background noise in a life that had turned the volume up on everything good. Sophie and I started talking about the future in concrete terms. Not in a rushed, let's fix loneliness way, but in a we're building something real way. She mentioned wanting to open her own practice eventually. I told her about my plan to buy the building next to the shop and expand. We talked about trips we wanted to take. Places we'd never been. Dreams that didn't require someone else's permission. One evening, Sophie and I were working on her Jeep in my garage. She was under the hood checking fluid levels while I replaced a worn serpentine belt. Music played low from the workbench radio. Max was sprawled on his bed in the corner, snoring like a chainsaw. It was domestic in the best possible way. Sophie straightened up, wiping her hands on a rag. You know what I love about this? I glanced over. What's that? She gestured around the garage. This. Us just existing together. Not having to fill every silence with conversation or performance. Just being. I smiled. That's called compatibility. She walked over and kissed me, tasting like mint chapstick in confidence. Yeah. I like it. That night, after Sophie went home, I sat in my living room with a beer and took stock of where I was. 6 months ago, I'd been in the wreckage of a marriage I thought I could save. Sitting in a house that felt haunted by someone who'd already moved on emotionally. Questioning whether I was enough. Whether I'd failed somehow. Now I was in the same house, but it felt completely different. It felt like mine. The walls held different memories. The silence was peaceful instead of oppressive. I had a thriving business, a woman who chose me every single day, and a clarity about what I wanted that I'd never had before. Not because I'd become someone different, but because I'd stopped shrinking myself to fit someone else's expectations. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Thanks for today. I needed that. Just being with you feels like home. I read it twice, feeling something settle in my chest. That's what it was supposed to feel like. Not complicated. Not conditional. Just home. I replied. Same here. Get some rest. She sent back a heart emoji, and I set the phone down, smiling like an idiot. Max lifted his head, gave me a look that clearly said you're being sappy, then went back to sleep. I scratched his ears. Yeah, buddy. I know. But it's the good kind of sappy. The following week, I got an unexpected visitor at the shop. Patricia Chen, Jessica's former attorney. She walked in during my lunch break, looking decidedly uncomfortable. Mr. Carter. Do you have a moment? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. What can I do for you, Patricia? She sat down, briefcase in her lap like a shield. I want to apologize. When Jessica hired me, she presented a very specific version of events. I built our case around her narrative. After the divorce finalized and I saw the evidence your attorney provided, I realized she'd misrepresented significant facts. I leaned back, arms crossed. And you're telling me this now because... She met my eyes. Because I don't like being lied to, and I don't like being used to harass innocent people. What she's saying about you now, the abuse allegations, they're baseless. I've seen your documentation. If she tries to pursue any legal action based on those claims, I won't represent her. And I'll testify to the evidence if needed. That floored me. Lawyers don't typically turn on their own clients, even former ones. I appreciate that. She stood, extending her hand. You handled this with a lot more grace than most people would have. I shook her hand. I had good counsel. And good reason to keep my head. She nodded, something like respect in her expression. Your attorney said the same thing about you. Good luck, Mr. Carter. And she left. I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Even Jessica's own lawyer had seen through the lies. That felt like vindication in a way I hadn't expected to need but appreciated nonetheless. That weekend, Sophie and I drove up to Flagstaff for a car show. The Chevelle turned heads everywhere we went. People stopped to take photos, asked questions about the build, complimented the paint and the sound. Sophie stood next to me, beaming like she'd built it herself. A guy in his 60s, wearing a vintage Chevy jacket, walked up and gave the car a long appreciative look. "This is beautiful work. You build it yourself?" I nodded. "Every piece." He smiled. "It shows. You can always tell when someone builds with pride instead of just chasing a check." His wife joined him, looping her arm through his. "We had a '70 Chevelle back in the day. Wish we'd kept it." Sophie grinned. "Maybe you should build another one." The woman laughed. "At our age, we'll leave that to the young folks. But we'll enjoy looking at this beauty." As they walked away, Sophie leaned into me. "That's going to be us in 30 years. Still going to car shows. Still annoying people with stories about the good old days." I kissed the top of her head. "Sounds perfect." We spent the rest of the day wandering the show, eating overpriced hot dogs, and debating which classic we'd restore next if money wasn't an object. She lobbied hard for a '69 Camaro. I made the case for a '57 Bel Air. We didn't settle it, but the conversation was the point. Planning a future together. Dreaming out loud. It felt solid in a way I'd forgotten relationships could feel. On the drive back to Phoenix, the sun setting in the rearview mirror, Sophie asked me something I hadn't expected. "Do you think you'll ever trust someone completely again? After everything with Jessica?" I thought about it, hands steady on the wheel, the Chevelle purring beneath us. "I think trust isn't something you give all at once. It's something you build. Brick by brick. Action by action." Jessica broke that trust in a way that can't be repaired. But that doesn't mean I'm incapable of trusting again. It just means I'm more careful about who I give that opportunity to. Sophie nodded slowly. "And do you trust me?" I glanced over at her. "Yeah. I do." She smiled. "Good. Because I trust you too. And I don't say that lightly." The months rolled forward. Summer turned to fall. The shop stayed busy. Sophie and I fell into rhythms that felt like partnership. She started keeping a toothbrush at my place. I kept a change of clothes at hers. We talked about getting a place together, something that was ours from the start instead of spaces we were retrofitting around each other. Max adored her, which was the most important seal of approval as far as I was concerned. My family treated her like she'd always been there. Her friends welcomed me without the awkwardness that sometimes comes with meeting the new boyfriend. Everything clicked. Then one night, about 8 months after the divorce, I was closing up the shop when I saw her. Jessica. Sitting in her car across the street. Just sitting there. Watching. I walked over, not aggressively, just directly. I knocked on her window. She jumped, clearly not expecting me to approach. She rolled the window down halfway. "What are you doing here, Jessica?" Her eyes were red. She looked thinner. Tired. "I just wanted to see you. This isn't healthy. You need to move on." She laughed, but it was bitter. "Move on. Like you did. With her. Sophie isn't a rebound. She's a person I met after you and I were finished. There's a difference." Jessica's hands gripped the steering wheel. "You were supposed to fight for me." I stared at her, genuinely confused. "You told me I wasn't man enough for you. You cheated. You asked for a divorce. What exactly was I supposed to fight for?" She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did but couldn't say it out loud. The truth was, she'd expected me to fall apart. To beg. To prove I couldn't live without her. And when I didn't, when I moved on and built something better, it shattered whatever narrative she'd been telling herself. "You left because you thought you'd find something better. Did you?" Her face crumpled. "No. I made a mistake. Trevor was a mistake. All of it was a mistake." I kept my voice even, not cruel, just honest. "That's not my problem anymore. You made your choices. I made mine. Now we both have to live with them. I stepped back from the car. Don't come to my shop again. Don't text. Don't call. We're done, Jessica. Completely. And I walked away, leaving her sitting there in the dark. When I got home, Sophie was on the couch with Max, watching some home renovation show. She looked up as I walked in. You okay? You look rattled. I told her what happened. All of it. She listened without interrupting, then patted the couch next to her. Come here. I sat, and she wrapped her arms around me. That must have been hard. It was. But it was also necessary. She needed to hear that I'm not coming back. That there's no door left open. Sophie kissed my temple. Good. Because you deserve someone who doesn't make you question your worth. And for the record, you're more than man enough. You're exactly enough. Just as you are. I pulled her closer, feeling the truth of those words settle in. Jessica had spent years making me feel insufficient. Sophie spent every day showing me I was whole. The next morning, I woke up to a series of texts from Monica. Jessica showed up at my place last night. She's spiraling. Talking about how she ruined everything. I don't know what to do. I replied simply. She needs professional help, not family intervention. Encourage her to see a therapist. But her healing isn't your responsibility, and it's definitely not mine. Monica responded. You're right. I just feel guilty. Don't. She made her choices as a grown adult. Now she has to deal with the consequences. That's not cruelty. That's life. Monica sent back a thumbs up, and I set the phone down. Sophie was making coffee in the kitchen, humming along to something on the radio. I walked up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist. She leaned back into me. Morning. Morning. She turned in my arms. Big plans today. I smiled. Just the usual. Work. Maybe take you to dinner later. She kissed me. Sounds perfect. That afternoon at the shop, Jason asked me something while we were rebuilding a transmission. How do you know when you've found the right person? The question caught me off guard. I set down the torque wrench and thought about it. You know, because being with them doesn't feel like work. It feels like coming home. There's no guessing where you stand. No games. Just honesty and choice. Every day you both wake up and choose each other. That's it. He nodded, clearly chewing on that. My girlfriend keeps talking about other guys. Like, comparing me to them. I grimaced. That's not normal. And it's not okay. If she's making you feel like you're not enough, that's a her problem, not a you problem. Don't waste your time trying to measure up to some imaginary standard. Find someone who sees your value without needing a comparison. He looked relieved, like I'd given him permission to trust his gut. Thanks, boss. I clapped him on the shoulder. Anytime, kid. Sophie and I went to dinner that night at a quiet Italian place we both loved. Over pasta and wine, she brought up something I'd been thinking about but hadn't said out loud yet. So I've been looking at office spaces for the practice. There's one near the shop. Good area. Reasonable lease. I think I'm going to put in an offer. That's amazing. When? Hopefully next month. She paused, twirling her fork. And I was thinking, if you're serious about expanding the shop and buying that next building, maybe we should think about pooling resources. Not rushing into anything, but planning smart. Like a team. I reached across the table and took her hand. I love that. Let's do it. Her face lit up. Yeah. Together. Yeah. Together. We spent the rest of dinner talking logistics. Budgets. Timelines. The kind of boring practical conversations that matter more than grand romantic gestures. This was us building a foundation. Brick by brick. Decision by decision. It wasn't flashy. It was solid. and solid lasts. On the way home, she fell asleep in the passenger seat, head against the window, completely at peace. I glanced over at her and felt a contentment I hadn't known I was capable of. This was what it was supposed to feel like. Easy. Sure. Right. A few weeks later, I got one final message from Jessica. It was long. Rambling. An apology wrapped in excuses and self-pity. She talked about therapy and realizations and how she finally understood what she'd lost. She said she didn't expect me to take her back but hoped I could forgive her someday. I read it once, then deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of closure. Forgiveness wasn't something she was owed, and whether I gave it or not didn't change my life. I'd already moved on. She was a chapter that had ended. The book continued without her. Sophie and I signed the lease on her office space the same week I closed on the building next to the shop. We celebrated with cheap champagne in my garage, sitting on overturned crates, Max at our feet. She raised her plastic cup. To new beginnings. I clinked mine against hers. To building something that lasts. We drank, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. You know what the best part is? What's that? We get to do this together. No secrets. No games. Just us figuring it out as we go. I kissed the top of her head. That's all I ever wanted. She looked up at me, eyes clear and certain. Then you've got it. Later that night, lying in bed with Sophie curled against me, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal that had felt like an ending. The divorce that had felt like failure. The months of rebuilding that had felt like climbing uphill in the dark. All of it had been necessary. Not because suffering builds character, but because sometimes you have to lose what's wrong to make room for what's right. Jessica had told me I wasn't man enough. She'd been wrong. I was exactly enough. I just needed someone who could see it. And now I had her. Not as a prize or a validation. Just as a partner. An equal. Someone who chose me the same way I chose her. On purpose. Every single day. The Chevelle sat in the garage, polished and perfect. A testament to patience and precision. To taking something broken and making it whole again. I'd done the same thing with my life. Piece by piece. Day by day. And now, finally, everything ran smooth. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning. Heavy cardstock, elegant script, the kind of formality that makes you pay attention. It was for a charity gala hosted by one of Phoenix's bigger automotive clubs. A fundraiser for kids' STEM programs, with a classic car showcase as the main attraction. Sophie read it over my shoulder while I drank coffee. You should enter the Chevelle. This is exactly the kind of event it was made for. I considered it. The gala was black tie, high profile, the kind of gathering where Phoenix's car community came out in force. It would be good for the shop. Good exposure. And honestly, I was proud of what I built. Yeah, I think I will. The weeks leading up to the gala were consumed with final details. I detailed the Chevelle until it gleamed. Every chrome piece polished. Every surface buffed to mirror shine. Sophie bought a dress, something elegant and understated that somehow made her look like she'd walked off a runway. The night of the event, I wore the suit I'd bought for court appearances, the one that made me feel capable instead of costumed. We drove the Chevelle downtown, the city lights reflecting off the hood, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The gala was held at a historic hotel with vaulted ceilings and chandeliers that cost more than most cars. The parking area was a showcase itself. Vintage Ferraris, restored Porsches, muscle cars from every era lined up like soldiers at attention. I pulled the Chevelle into my assigned spot, and immediately people started gravitating toward it. Questions flew. What year? Original engine. How long did the build take? I answered them all, comfortable in my element, while Sophie stood beside me with a quiet pride that meant more than any trophy could. We moved inside for the dinner portion. Round tables, wait staff in crisp uniforms, speeches from organizers about the importance of giving kids access to tools and education. Sophie squeezed my hand under the table during one particularly moving story about a teenager who'd built his first engine through the program. "This is good work." I nodded. "It is." When they announced the car showcase winners, I wasn't expecting anything. There were incredible builds in that lot. Cars that represented decades of craftsmanship. But when they called the Chevelle for Best in Show, Sophie jumped to her feet before I could even process it. "That's you. Go." I walked to the front, shook hands with the organizers, accepted a plaque that felt heavier than it should. The applause was genuine, the kind that comes from people who understand what goes into a build like this. I thanked them, mentioned the shop, and returned to the table where Sophie was beaming. "I'm so proud of you. Not just for this, but for everything you've built. The car, the business, yourself. You did that." I kissed her temple. "We did that." She shook her head. "No. You rebuilt your life. I just gotta show up for the good part. I'm lucky I get to be here." I pulled her closer. "I'm the lucky one." As the evening wound down, we stepped outside for air. The Chevelle sat under the hotel's entrance lights, drawing a small crowd even now. Sophie leaned against me, heels in hand, barefoot on the warm pavement. This was a perfect night. It really was. She looked up at me, something shifting in her expression. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." "I'm falling in love with you." She said it simply, no preamble, no hesitation. Just truth delivered plain. "And I wanted you to know. Not because I need you to say it back right now, but because it's true. And I don't want to hold it in anymore." I turned to face her fully, hands on her shoulders. "I'm already there, Sophie. I've been falling for months. I just didn't want to rush it or make you feel like you had to match my pace. But yeah. I love you." She smiled, the kind that starts small and takes over your whole face. Good. Because I was starting to think I was alone in this. I laughed and kissed her, right there under the hotel lights with people milling around and cars gleaming behind us. It wasn't a movie moment. It was better. It was real. The drive home was quiet in the best way. Sophie dozed in the passenger seat, my hand resting on her knee, the city lights giving way to our neighborhood. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment, engine idling, looking at the house that had gone from haunted to home. Max barked once from inside, his welcome home ritual. Sophie stirred awake. "We here. We're here." She stretched, cat-like. "Best night ever." I agree. We walked inside together, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was the life I was supposed to be living. Not the one I tried to salvage. This one. Built from honesty and choice. Monday morning brought an unexpected email. It was from a production company in Los Angeles. They were developing a show about custom car builds and restoration shops, and someone had sent them photos of the Chevelle along with my information. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in being featured. I read it 3 times, certain it was spam. But the sender's credentials checked out. The company was legitimate. I called Sophie. "You're not going to believe this." She listened as I explained, then squealed loud enough that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Daniel. This is huge. You have to do it." I was more cautious. "It's a lot of exposure. What if it's a disaster? What if they edit me to look like an idiot?" She laughed. "You're overthinking. They contacted you because your work speaks for itself. Let it speak louder." I spent the week considering it. Talked to Jason about what it might mean for the shop. Called my dad for advice. He said what he always said. Trust your gut. And your gut says this is an opportunity. Don't let fear keep you small. So I replied to the email. Said I was interested. They set up a call. By the following week, I was signing contracts for a 3-episode feature. They'd come to Phoenix, film the shop, follow a build from start to finish. Sophie was more excited than I was. She started planning how to reorganize the shop for better camera angles. I told her she was getting ahead of things. She told me someone had to. The production crew arrived in early spring. They were professional, efficient, and less intrusive than I'd feared. They filmed me working, interviewed clients, captured the process of building a vintage Bronco from the frame up. Sophie made a cameo, bringing lunch one afternoon and charming the entire crew within minutes. They asked if she was my girlfriend. I said yes. They asked how we met. I gave them the short version. Gym, cars, tacos. They loved it. Said it was wholesome and genuine. Modern audiences eat that up, the producer said. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I trusted they knew their business. During one of the interview segments, they asked about my background. How I got into cars. What drove me to open my own shop. I told them about learning from my grandfather, about the satisfaction of solving mechanical puzzles, about building the Chevelle during one of the hardest periods of my life. They asked if I wanted to elaborate on that hard period. I kept it vague. Divorce. Fresh start. Building something new. They nodded knowingly. Great arc, the interviewer said. Redemption through craft. I wasn't sure I'd call it redemption. More like reconstruction. But I let them have their narrative. The episode aired 4 months later. Sophie threw a watch party at my place. My family came. A handful of friends from the shop. We crowded around the TV with pizza and beer, and when it started, I wanted to crawl under the couch. Seeing yourself on screen is deeply uncomfortable. But as it went on, I relaxed. They'd edited it well. Made the work look compelling. Made me look competent without over-dramatizing. The Bronco build came together on screen in a satisfying montage. And the final shot of me and Sophie walking through the shop together, her laughing at something I'd said, felt true. My mom cried. My dad clapped me on the back. Jason took a photo of the screen and immediately posted it. Within an hour, my phone was lighting up with messages. The impact was immediate. The shop's Instagram gained thousands of followers overnight. Requests for builds started pouring in. Not just local clients, but people from out of state willing to ship their cars to Phoenix. I had to hire 2 more mechanics to keep up with demand. Sophie's practice saw a bump too. Apparently being featured on a show as the supportive girlfriend made her PT services suddenly very desirable. We joked that we'd accidentally stumbled into being Phoenix's favorite low-key power couple. It was absurd and kind of wonderful. With success came scrutiny. My inbox filled with interview requests, podcast invitations, people wanting my story. Most I declined. But one email stood out. It was from a men's magazine doing a piece on rebuilding after divorce. They wanted to feature men who'd turned personal loss into professional gain. I almost deleted it. But Sophie encouraged me to consider it. Your story could help someone. That's worth an hour of your time. So I agreed. The interview was conducted over the phone. The journalist was sharp but respectful. Asked about the divorce without being invasive. I kept Jessica anonymous. Referred to her only as my ex-wife. Talked about the process of discovering infidelity, the decision to file, the months of rebuilding my sense of self. I talked about the Chevelle as therapy. About how working with my hands kept me grounded when everything else felt unstable. And I talked about Sophie, though not by name, as proof that starting over doesn't mean settling. It means choosing better. The piece ran the following month. Titled Starting Over After Betrayal. Sophie read it first, then handed me her phone. This is beautiful, Daniel. You should be proud. I skimmed it. They'd captured the essence without sensationalizing the pain. That felt like a victory. One evening, about 1.5 years after the divorce, Sophie and I were having dinner at home when she asked a question that had clearly been building for a while. Have you thought about what's next for us? I set down my fork. Next how? She took a breath. I love what we have. But I also want to know we're building towards something long-term. Not just coasting. I get that you've been burned. But I need to know if marriage is something you'd ever consider again. Or if that's off the table permanently. It was a fair question. One I'd been avoiding because the answer required me to separate what Jessica had broken from what Sophie had rebuilt. I reached across the table and took her hand. Marriage isn't off the table. But I need to be sure. Not sure about you. I'm sure about you. But sure that I can do it right this time. That I won't bring old baggage into something new. She nodded slowly. I understand that. And I'm not in a rush. I just needed to know we're on the same page about the direction. We are. I want a future with you, Sophie. I want to build a life that we're both invested in. Not someday vague. Someday specific. Her eyes got bright. Okay. Good. That's all I needed to hear. That conversation shifted something. We started talking about timelines. About buying a house together instead of splitting time between two places. About what kind of life we wanted to build. Kids were a maybe. Travel was a definite. Growing our businesses was a priority. But mostly, we wanted stability. The kind built on mutual respect and shared values. Not fireworks. Foundation. Within 3 months, we'd bought a place. A mid-century house with a big garage and a yard for Max. It needed work, but that was the appeal. We could make it ours from the ground up. Moving in together was seamless. We divided tasks without negotiating. She handled interior design. I handled structural repairs. We painted walls on weekends, installed new fixtures, planted desert landscaping that wouldn't die in the Arizona heat. Every decision was collaborative. Every disagreement resolved without escalation. This is what partnership looks like, she said one Saturday while we were grouting tile. No keeping score. Just showing up. I kissed her temple. Exactly. The shop continued to grow. I bought out the building's previous owner and expanded into the additional space. Added a showroom for finished builds. Hired an office manager so I could focus on the work instead of the paperwork. Jason became my lead mechanic, proving that investing in people pays dividends. Sophie's practice thrived. She hired 2 associate therapists and started offering specialized sports rehab programs. We were both building empires, just scaled to fit our lives. No pretension. Just steady growth. One night, almost 2 years after meeting Sophie, I was closing up the shop when I found myself alone with the Chevelle. I ran my hand along the hood, remembering the state I'd been in when I started building it. Broken. Angry. Lost. The car had been my way through the darkness. A project that demanded focus and patience. A reminder that broken things can be made whole. I wasn't that man anymore. I'd healed. Grown. Found something better. The Chevelle had done its job. Now it was just a beautiful car. A symbol of survival, not a crutch for it. I drove home that night with the windows down, the desert air warm against my face. Sophie was on the porch when I pulled up, 2 beers in hand. Thought you might need this. I took the bottle and kissed her. You know me too well. We sat on the porch steps, Max between us, watching the neighborhood settle into evening. This is good, she said quietly. This life we've built. It really is. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Think Jessica ever realized what she gave up? I shrugged. Doesn't matter. Her loss became my gain. That's the only part of the story that counts. Sophie was right. Jessica's choices had set me free. Free to find someone who valued what I brought instead of measuring it against some imaginary standard. Free to build a business I was proud of. Free to become the version of myself I was always capable of being. Not man enough, Jessica had said. She'd been wrong. I was exactly enough. I just needed someone who could see it. And now I had her. Not as proof of my worth. Just as a partner who chose me the way I chose her. Deliberately. Completely. Every single day. We finished our beers in comfortable silence, then headed inside. Sophie started making dinner while I set the table. Max settled into his bed with a contented sigh. The house smelled like garlic and fresh bread and home. This was the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. Not louder or flashier. Just truer. And truth, I'd learned, was the only foundation worth building on. Everything else was just performance. And I was done performing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.